Hello, everybody. Nice crowd. I'm very happy to see you all here. My name is Marcus Miller. I'm the director here at the Gordon Snellgrove Gallery. And I'm just going to briefly introduce our visiting artist here, Leah Rosenberg. And I'll tell you about a few other things that are happening as well that are related to her visit here in Saskatoon. Leah is actually staying here in Saskatoon for an extended period. She lives and works in San Francisco as an artist, where she received her MFA at the California College of Art. But she's here on an extended visit because she's installing work now up at the Canderdine Gallery. This is the card for it. And she's doing a collaboration in addition to her own work with Tammy Campbell. I think they're both doing solo shows, and then there's one gallery in the college galleries that's a collaboration.
Well, yeah, it's a two-person show, let's say,
that
hopefully will have some kind of intersecting dialogue.
That's what I meant to say.
We work together putting it together.
Okay, good. So that show opens on September 30th. And it's interesting, you know, Leah, I think this is the bio that I found on your website, you say that the materials that you use, it's not the materials, but the genres, let's say, are painting, sculpture, installation, and pastry. And so that makes her a perfect candidate for this year's Nuit Blanche, which is curated around the theme of food. So she's also in Nuit Blanche, which is the following night, October 1st. Leah was educated, as I say, in San Francisco, MFA there. She received her BFA at the Emily Carr College of Art and Design. She's had shows all over the place, oodles and oodles of shows in San Francisco, Dallas, Texas. Is that my phone? Oh no! Somebody do something. And please, everybody, turn your phones off right now.
Mindy's on the line.
Mindy is on the line. Of course she's on the line. I'll call her back. She's shown, as I say, all over the States. Especially California and San Francisco, Texas, in Florida. She's shown, she was in a show called Art Move's Billboard Festival in Tyrone, Poland. She was in a show called Collections at the Nile Sunset Annex in Cairo, Egypt. And what else did I want to say? She wrote her thesis on the artistic possibilities of cake. So I'm sure that food is going to be a big part of her discussion here, in addition to color. So I wanted to mention also, and I'm gonna wrap this up real soon. She is now installing work at the Canderdine, and she's doing this over an extended period of time. So it's a performance really, and it's open. So you should go, I think you're there from what, 11:30 to 4 sort of thing? Yeah, so go in and see her now at the Canderdine. That's going on right now. I've mentioned the Nuit Blanche. And next week, unrelated but sort of related, we have Wayne Burwalt and some artists coming in for a talk here at the Snellgrove next Thursday. Leah.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Sorry you had to look at this image for so long. Although, and I only say that because originally I didn't like it. And it's not mine. But it was the painting that my parents brought home. Well, actually, my mom's here. So I have to admit this is not the painting that my parents brought home. But it is by the artist, and it resembles sort of this wet, oil, goopy landscape painting. And I was just sort of taken when they came home with it because they hadn't really collected much art, hadn't exchanged money for art that I had known of. And I was 10, and I just wanted to know what they were thinking when they bought this. And they bought it at an auction, and my dad had one reason, which was that the artist was local. And my mom had another reason, which was that she liked the idea that it wouldn't be dry for years, so you could actually watch this painting dry. It was still stick your finger in it. For me, it sparked curiosity about art because I wanted to know what this artist was thinking when they made it, because it was clearly something, just aside from like it being something that they saw in front of them, they had this style. I have to use this thing. I knew there'd be something because there's always something. Let's see. Sorry, guys. Oh, yeah. So I'm gonna just start with, and I should say every talk that I've given to date, I start with I'm from Saskatoon, and then I go on to explain where and what Saskatoon is to people. And I do that because for one, it's very much part of who I am. And two, I feel like any audience you talk to and you start with I'm from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, they can't really hate you. They've at least learned something. But here, I'm here, and I don't need to tell anyone about Saskatoon's location or charm. So I'll just start with the first year of grad school in San Francisco. I spent the first year working on these 3 pairs of paintings, and I don't know what I was trying. I was trying to create my own style, like this other artist. And I would layer paint down, take them all outside, sand them down, layer paint, sand them down. Until, I thought maybe the paintings would tell me something in the process. Until one day, one of the other students who worked across from me was passing by me sanding and said, Leah, you're never going to finish anything in the whole time you're here if you keep doing this. And I was obviously open to some kind of, opinion or criticism because I was not entirely offended. I thought she might have a point. And I went back to the studio where I sort of looked at it with fresh eyes and noticed this kitchen-like ambiance and decided maybe I just need to get out of the studio a little bit to really understand what I'm doing. So I started taking cake decorating classes on Saturdays at this guy's loft with some older women who were also interested in cake decorating. And these were my first 4 cakes. And I would put them in the box. You were allowed to take home the full cake. And I would bring them in my bike basket to my painting critiques. And the response was pretty delightful. I'll just go back. It was positive, and people ate the cake, and then they remembered the cake, and then they wanted more cake. And I thought, well, I'm making these cakes with the very same intention that I made the paintings that are hanging on the wall, and yet the response is so different. So it sort of started, or was the beginning of a question. A big question for me was whether painting could do what cake can. And so I started making cakes that were, or paintings that were more sculptural, cake-like, and cakes that were sort of in reference to the paintings, and I would present the cakes on a pedestal, much like a sculpture. And so there was also something, I think, that happened in which delight and expectation became another additional medium for me. I had a professor at this time who was actually my main advisor. He would only talk about my work if I set up this sort of like pile of glossy magazines and he'd flip through them and tell me what to do. And one day he said, you know what, it's getting too confusing. The cake is making the artwork look too saccharine, and it's just not making sense. You have to pick one. Pick paint or pick cake. cake your art or make paintings that are delicious. And he made a sign for me to wear around my neck for the next day that said no more cake, and I was supposed to walk around school with it on. And I actually did heed his advice. I went home that night and made as many cakes as I could all through the night, and then brought them all to the class and or to the admin office and put them out there. And then when there was no more cake, the sign went out. And that lasted for about a week until I made a cake again. Because what I realized by that small break is that it was more about doing the two things simultaneously that was teaching me something and making more questions. And so I wanted to pursue that. Like, so this cake, once you cut into it, actually reveals a painting to me on the inside. And so what if the conversation keeps going back and forth? And something interesting was, to me, was that I was making the cake with the same intention as the painting, or they were almost like matching, but the cake in the end would be gone and the painting was up for constant judgment. And I was interested in sort of the end of cake. And so also thinking about the processes of making a cake, mixing and pouring and stacking, our actions in the kitchen to bake, and thinking about making three-dimensional paintings, to me, meant taking the paint off of the substrate. So I started mixing and pouring the paint, pouring them into these shallow trays, and then letting it dry, peeling it up, so you end up with a painting of an object rather than just an image. And then it has also this same, I was noticing, appeal as a cake where people were wanting to touch it or to lick it or cut into it. And so I started doing that, which would also then reveal a sort of painting on the inside. And I sort of, another question arose, which was like, what does it mean to make something that look good enough to eat? Is that palette? Is it material? Is it the way that it's presented? And I started thinking about what would this look like as a painting? And what is it to make a generous painting? If I'm making a cake and offering it as a generous act and people like that, maybe the interesting thing might be to pursue what it means to make a generous painting and if that's even possible. So I thought, well, maybe a generous painting is so many layers of paint or all of the colors imaginable. So I would start layering the whole panel with one layer of paint, masking off that color, layering it again, masking off. And in the end, too, you end up getting the accumulation of the material, which ends up being also sculptural, where you see the part in between where it's sort of ruffly. And then I thought, okay, well, it's not generous if I'm just picking the colors, because that's just kind of about me. What if I send out a survey to all of the graduating students in my class, asking them a series of questions, like what their favorite color is, or where they're from, or their favorite season, and sort of deduce that into 4 stripes. So each person sort of is rewarded in these 4 stripes. And so this ends up being a painting for the graduating class of 2008, and about them at the same time. So these are 4 by 8 each, or 9, I guess, once you have the length of them. And for each of the, I was still, for all of these stripe paintings that I was making, I was mixing an extra little bit of it and pouring it into one of these trays, and this ended up being sort of an autobiography of all of the stripe paintings I made in graduate school. And it was just about my height, and now it has, years and years later, has taken this like crazy aged slump and actually broken it into 2 pieces. And this is called millefeuille, which is sort of a play on the French pastry, which is, I think, translates to 1,000 sheets. And again, just thinking about other ways of making a stack, folding, cutting, and other actions and shapes, so that almost these sheets become almost like fabric or gift wrap or burritos. And then I had the show after graduating, And this was at a small, like, sort of artist-run center, but they also did food engagement things or workshops called Time Will Tell. And as a matter, this is all sort of a transparent colored vinyl, so it ends up sort of greeting people, even if they don't come into the space, they are sort of offered something, and as the light comes through, the whole space changes over the, everyone, depending on the time of day that they're coming in, they're sort of experiencing something different. And actually for this show, something that has always been, I think like art for me is a way of communicating and connecting with people, and I'm always trying to find ways of connecting or sort of explaining what I do to my parents and maybe to other people, family, and even kids. And this was a way of me doing that, and my mom would collect the horoscopes from the Saskatoon Star Phoenix, written by Holiday Mathis, who I thought was just a wizard. And turns out she's from LA, but I would collect all of these, and I think it was also maybe a way of me connecting back to Saskatoon, somewhere that I had now been gone for 10 years, and just taken these excerpts and maybe shifted them a little bit to make these text pieces. And this is when I only had a table for a studio. I didn't have a studio anymore, and I was trying to keep up a practice. And so I did what I could with the space, and by practicing, like trying, okay, if I could get really good at something, maybe it would be a straight line, and just really simplifying things, and thinking about also the idea of generosity still, in that what do people need to hear right now, and what do I need to tell myself now in this year after grad school. There was a space. Meanwhile, I'm still making cake, and I made this cake that was as long as the space was, and it was cut into from both ends over the course of the opening, and as you got towards the middle, the variations of the stripes changed, much like the stripes on the wall. And this is a very satisfying moment for me, where people are actually consuming the art and the art that is cake, so it's like happening at the same time. And I wonder how that sort of affects their memory of an artwork or of the moment. So this was when I first got the job at SF MoMA. I was working at Miette, this patisserie, all through grad school, where I sort of got the idea of my thesis, because I was always engaging with people who wanted pastry, but they wanted a lemon tart, and I would get the lemon tart, but they'd want that lemon tart, like the fourth one that I'd have to take out. And that was very interesting to me, like what they thought they were all exactly the same, or if they'd ask me, what my favorite thing was, because they couldn't decide, they'd get something completely different. So that idea of judgment and sort of taste also became interesting to me, and meanwhile making cakes and not really good at it, honestly. I mean, they didn't stand up straight. They were a little dry, maybe. But my boss at Miette was Caitlin Freeman, who married James Freeman, who owns Blue Bottle Coffee in San Francisco. And they were offered a space at the rooftop at SF MoMA, and Caitlin said, why don't you join me? I'd like to make Thibaut cakes. And Thibaut, I don't know if you know, makes these like sort of luscious paintings of cakes and desserts and food, and is still alive at like, I think, 93 and plays tennis. Anyway, she was very taken with him, thought like cake and coffee will really go together. And together we started, I thought she was mad, because I didn't know anything really. And she said she didn't want to ask someone what to put on top of a carrot cake and they say a carrot. So she just thought we worked well together in terms of like my art practice and her knowledge of pastry, and she taught me everything in this tiny kitchen, 6-foot kitchen, and all these books on the top are an assortment. It's as many recipe books as it is sort of exhibition catalogs. And this really became my studio for the next 4.5 years. A lot of experimenting. We conceptualized this Mondrian cake together. So we went beyond just Thibaut cake. If we were going to be at the museum, why not really explore what people know about art and then try to make it into something delicious. And, people come from everywhere, just to see a Rothko or sit in front of a Rothko. What happens when they come upstairs and get to eat that? Like, what happens to their experience or their memory of that painting if it's sort of heightened in this way? This is Richard Serra. We made a build your own Richard Serra cookie plate. And so there were these moments where it was very exciting for me because I got to really use a lot of my creative energy, little drawings for napkins or, thinking about color. I mean, at one point we were talking about doing natural food coloring for the Monterey cake, and I said, we're talking about painting here. Like, I think if someone, if what we're trying to do is honor the artist and the process, I think the point is to be true to that. And so, never mind that natural food coloring for this at least. And so I really got to challenge myself too. And I show this one because it was a teaching, a lesson for us too, because Richard Serra actually got an email from the curator, Ali Gass, saying, I hate to tell you this, but Richard Serra does not like the cookie plate, please take it away. And of course, we only wanted to honor artists. We were not trying to make fun in any way or be sort of tweet. This was serious. This was really, the ingredients were important, the look of it, the real, how something is made. So that was fine, no problem. We had just ordered 1,000 more of these napkins, no big deal. We'll just pack those away in storage. And it was practically a cease and desist. And apparently he's quite sort of notorious for not wanting things that happen around his work, which is fine. But it did make us realize maybe to work a little ahead of schedule and to start collaborating more with curators and artists. This is Cindy Sherman taking a picture of the float that we were workshopping for her retrospective based on the clown with the glitter hat, and it was bubblegum syrup, and we made a special coaster that matched with the fabric. And she approved, she loved it, and we snatched this picture. And these end up being really good stories, and so we thought, okay, well, there's a sort of exhibition that happens called Sika every year, and a friend of mine had been awarded it, and I thought, well, now we can start doing studio visits and going a little deeper, and using this as a way of teaching people who know all about Rothko more about someone like Ruth Lasky, who's not as known, and she dyes her thread and weaves these weavings, and so this was a real experience where we actually collaborated too with the people who made the frames, and they made this stained the frames the same color as these trays. And then getting to do something a little bit on a bigger scale. Instead of 7-foot cake, it's 21 feet, and people getting to kind of trying to collaborate more with the museum and their programming. And then the museum closed for a major expansion. It just reopened, and this was for the groundbreaking ceremony. And I went down and measured all of the bricks from the building and cookies based on that size. And then we had edible spray paint, and everyone was invited to come and take a cookie and tag the wall. Meanwhile, I'm trying to get shows and keep a practice in the garage, and thinking, okay, well, I've really gotten to these trays. Like, how do I make us keep using these trays in this form of painting, but not make a stack? And so I brought all the trays in and I just assembled them there. This is at a gallery in San Francisco that's actually in someone's home. And that was also an interesting thing to me, this kind of idea of hospitality too, almost someone changing their living arrangements in order to accommodate art and then inviting people in. And so this sort of felt a little more like domestic work somehow, and maybe that was because it was just in the home. But what ended up happening is that the art told me what it was going to do again, and over time, same thing as the Time Will Tell show, where someone who comes in one day is going to see something different than the next, and the paint actually started to make its own pile. And of course now I couldn't really do much with this aside from wrap it all up into one ball at the end of the show. So I cut all of the remaining paint sheets down, and we had a punch party, and everyone sat around this big table and with punch and hole punched and punched out the, sheets of paint to make paint confetti that I sold for like $10 a gram at the end. And at this time, too, I think from being a little bit more active in the food world, I became friends with people who were opening restaurants and wanting to kind of, who end up being inspired by art too and wanting to kind of fill their space with it. And so I proposed this for state provisions, and the pegboard was already up, so that was sort of a factor of like what was going to happen. And there's something I think, other venues other than galleries that felt free and fun to me, and also all these people, these different sorts of people are going to experience it, and I wonder what the art in a restaurant does to sort of the restaurant goer, and also to the people who work there, creating sort of a lighthearted thing, and merging the two, and like what can art do for food or a diner's experience. I would like to think it makes the food taste better, or at least, so I took like ingredients on the menu or utensils in the kitchen and kind of abstracted those shapes and cut them out, painted them, and adhered them to the wall. They have since expanded and needed more pieces, and then opened another restaurant in which I did. They have sort of a series of works up in their private dining room. I also think cake has the potential to maybe is a means of communication or keeping your job. So I was supposed to rewrite my job proposal for SF MoMA because things were changing a little bit, and so I didn't know how to write out I didn't know how to do this. I didn't know how to say the words that I need this and I want this and because of this. So I made a cake. And it was like a pie chart thing. And so as I explained what I needed, I said, this much is going to be spent here and this much is going to be spent here. And I kept my job and even got to do some other fun things with the museum. So we started doing special programming with them. This was for their open space blog. And again, took that idea of the survey, all the guests, and what their favorite color was, and we made a bar chart cake. And it turns out, it was really weird, the woman who hosts the blog was wearing this dress and had no idea what was in the middle. It was so uncanny. And again, with cake, there's Cap Street Projects in San Francisco, which is celebrating their 30th anniversary, and they said, we'd love you to do cake. And I said, I don't know what to do. I made just one cake and then it's gone. How do I feed all these people and make it sort of conceptual? And I thought, I'll just make 30 cakes, like one for each year. And that's no joke. 30 cakes is a lot of cakes. But what I ended up doing is doing a little research of color trends for those years, the last 30 years. And the inside would be one color and the outside would be the other. And all of the people who had residencies over the course of that Cap Street project, I had them sort of parade out the cakes. And once people understood that the insides were different for each of them, people were like, I'll have 1997, and I'll have... And so the thing that ends up happening to me is the audience ends up being part of the piece and bringing back some of that joy and surprise into it. So in the end, this could just be 30 cakes and then I leave, but it's really nice to have sort of that participation for me. It's fueling. This is a show at Montalvo. I did a residency. It's in Sarasota, California. And this was with two artists, Christine Wanyap and Susan O'Malley. And this was a case in which the curator selected the three of us because of our work and really then stepped back and said, okay, I'm just going to let you guys design the show, essentially. And we split it into two. And one was, it was sort of this, the undercurrents of happiness, what it really means to be happy or to try to be happy, and the other. So it's a sort of solemn side and then a more like sort of glowy side. And I made some striped benches for that were, Montalvo actually has like these grounds and these hikes that you can take. So this was a piece where you could sit, and the neon is incandescent bulbs, which are the same bulbs that are used for those seasonal affects disorder that you sit in front of to make you happier. So I also like the idea that the longer you sit in front of this artwork, the happier you might become. And then, as I mentioned, these hiking trails, these were all colored paper embedded with wildflower seeds. So people were invited to take those and then plant them out front so that they could come back and see the wildflower seeds. But that sort of backfired when the gardener went away for 2 months and then they didn't water them. So it's okay. Moving on. There were also walking sticks that you could sign out and sort of take the color out into nature. And this is a collaboration with Susan O'Malley, who put these signs up, and so you would follow up the signs and sort of find these moments along the trail. And this is the studio at Montalvo. And I put this in, I don't usually like show, because this is a really sort of disaster. But it's kind of the way that I started thinking about the color on the outside coming into the color on the inside. There was just, this was a beautiful landscape and these studios, and also having this space, how that changes the work. And also it ends up, the studio you have is, you sleep in there, you cook in there. What happens when I layer a layer of paint and have to let it dry? I often will wash my hands and go to the kitchen and play around with things in there. And so what evolved from that is this, they have a Friday night sort of gala, and also other artists were there, so I collaborated with a filmmaker who did sort of a live stream above, and I started it with all of these this sort of grid of snacks, and as people took it, I would replace it, and it would become sort of chaotic. And in the end, I couldn't, I would end up not having enough, and there would just be crumbs left in the end. So, only film ever made, but it was kind of fun. And from there, went to Little Paper Plains residency, which was actually in a shop. But I wanted to sort of think about that serving aspect and making these small bites. And this is a letterpress placemat where people would actually come up to the bar, and I would serve them their courses from my little setup here. And all of the ingredients, thinking about ways of and actions of painting, brushing or spraying, and using that to sort of create a moment in each of the courses, and then each one is kind of a sculpture in its own way that leaves a residue that they can then end up, it's like a print. This is sort of not a good image of that, but I live in Bernal Heights in San Francisco, and a woman who worked at Blue Bottle opened her own place and said, we need a Leah Rosenberg. How about a Leah Rosenberg? And I said, how about that wall? And so, thinking about that, the color on the outside coming in, and living in Bernal and running and walking around, I was thinking how nice it would be for, she was very community oriented and wanted kids to come in. And so all of these colors can be found in that neighborhood, the mailbox outside, or the bike that's always locked up outside of the grocery store. So that was that, and the great thing about that was that I could install it in portions, because I would literally paint the pieces, walk down, and then we'd install them as they were building out. So it really doesn't look like art on the wall, it looks like it's part of the space, which is kind of important for me. And I did a residency at the Vermont Studio Center at a point where I was traveling a lot and sort of trying to watch money and not wanting to make anything that I needed to deal with at the end. And I walked in there and I noticed that the way they clean the studios between, a few days between groups of 50 who come in is just layer a coat of primer over everything in the studio. So every studio had a stool, an easel of this, and a table with sawhorses. And I thought, well, maybe that's how I'll record my time here, and in the end I'll just paint it over. And also, I'd never been to Vermont before, and thought, I was there in November when the seasons were changing, and was kind of struck by this blade of grass that was coming out of the snow. And I thought, I'll do that. And there's one hardware store, and they got to know me pretty well, to the point where the guy was like, I saw him as I was coming in, he would go to the back, because he didn't want to mix my paint for me. So I sort of I don't think I made friends, but anyway. And then I named the colors This was kind of, I like words and I like playing around with language, and so this was just also another little exercise on the wall where I would name the colors, and the last letter of the color would be the first letter of the next one, as you can see. So it's like a round, sort of. But the other thing that actually struck me about this project is because I was away, and nobody was seeing this really. I mean, there's 50 other artists there, but they're all in their own studio. I posted it on Instagram every day, and there was something, the audience expanded, and they looked forward to it, and I was getting I was waking up wanting to deliver a color to everybody. and so there's also something about Instagram where this comes up as a singular image. And then when you hashtag, you can actually see the collection, and you can see sort of the progress of the piece. And it's just been something, I know that like social media is a little bit hard to talk about, I think, when you're an artist, but for me it's proven to be like a really good way of chronicling these projects, and also getting some other projects out in the world. So this was the last day, and I revealed all of the stripes at Open Studio, and this ended up being sort of a backdrop or a stripe painting, and then it was all. And then I also like to do, of course, like while the paint is drying, all of the meals were provided, and there was a salad bar, and I would just collect little remnants of the meal every day and color match it. It's just fun little side things. I came back and did a residency at Taste, which was with Lisa Mishima. We've done a few projects together, and it was for Valentine's Day. And we called it intercourses, and couples were invited to buy a ticket, and we would serve. There were 3 sessions, or actually 4, over the course of 2 days. This was our sort of airplane-style cart, and the idea was this was the placemat, and each course was a different color pairing. So this is like sort of a teeter-totter thing. So one side would take something and it would fall over, and the next person would take. And then the idea was over the course of the night for the couple to become closer. So we would fold the placemat, and they have to sort of follow the color. This is like obviously inspired by Lady and the Tramp, and this is me explaining it's one noodle, 2 sides, and they have to put it together. And so this is a very fun, satisfying project. Lisa's a designer, so all of the sort of the text felt clean and nice, and it's just nice to work with someone who it feels like fun, even though you're working really hard. And I think that's a really rare thing, and I'm lucky to have a few of those. So this was a balloon that you pop with that pin, and what comes out are these 2 little colored sticks, pieces of paper, which you would bring up, and those determined what colored slices you have. And right after that, I started an Irving Street project, which is, this was her first show. It's a woman who has her studio in the back, and she just wanted to activate this front area a little bit. And at first I thought, okay, great, I need a studio. I'm just going to make a bunch of drawings in the window. And then I thought, what if that Vermont project could happen where people could actually see it? And she went for it. She didn't mind that she had just made her gallery pristine. I was going to paint it for 50 days. And I traveled around, like would bike there or walk around. It was right by the ocean, so there's a real particular palette over there, especially over the different times of day. And I did a little wander, and it ended up being sort of a map or a landscape painting. And in the end, a reveal. And I thought, great, I'm so clever. Oh, and like speaking of things that happen, like that you don't expect, this is Stevie, and he lived upstairs, and he would come down every day, and at the beginning he would just bang his head on the window until I opened the door. And then eventually he wanted to come in and help paint, and I would make these little buttons that if you visited that day, you would get that color. And he came every day, so he got every button, and one day he surprised me by coming down with all of the buttons he'd collected so far. And I go back and visit him because he's my buddy, and he said he painted his room the color of the ocean. So that kind of warmed my heart. And I thought, like, if that sticks with him, like, I think yay for art, honestly. And I think 2, I was very proud of myself because I thought, great, this is an opportunity where cake and painting are going to do the same thing, and they're both going to be over. Like, I'm going to paint over these stripes and serve this cake, and they'll both be gone. But something, and so I made these little color palettes. I actually worked at Chroma Acrylics in Vancouver for a few years after I graduated, and this was my favorite thing to do, and I didn't even think about it until I had made these, that it was actually, I was like, I'm pretty good at this. I think I've done this before, and I had done the color charts for Chroma. So anyway, I wanted to make these because I didn't think that there would be anything left over, but all of the sheets of the walls of paint peeled off. Like, I was trying to take the tape off of the ceiling, and a little chunk had come off, and I thought, that's wonderful, I'll have a little remnant. And I said, I asked someone to pass me the little cake server, and I started kind of like wedging the cake server, and the whole room came down. And so I framed them. And they became then objects. And I didn't just frame them. I had this show up parts, which is sort of an award. I had some, it was a budget for it, not enough to frame pieces as big, but I just thought these need to be preserved, and also look at them become paintings or objects where there once was none. And I like the failure and kind of the edges that have come off. I like that it's almost a mold of the space. And it fits like sort of serendipitously into this space. At this time I went, speaking on Instagram, this woman from Hamburg found me and emailed me and saw the pinhole wall and would really like to fill the shipping container that's going to become a cafe on the harbor in Hamburg. I said, yeah, right, like, this is not real, this is some kind of scam. And sure enough, they're like a beautiful family run business. They make clothes, and they invited me back for like the opening of the pavilion, and again, same thing. This was kind of my language now, and a way for me to connect to the place, and also for the colors to mean something to the people who are coming there when I'm not there. This is an architecture firm in LA, which actually happens to be my brother's architecture firm. And he also said, I need a wall. And I thought, okay, well, I'm not redoing this again. Like, how can we make this specific to the space? And his firm is sort of right by the metro, and there's all these kind of city patterns. And so I collected some of those, and I really wanted to make paintings again. And so I felt like these panels were sort of a way of getting back into that and risking my life. And I did a residency in Omaha, and this was for 3 months, and I'd never been. The studio at the Bemis Center, out of this world. So much space, I was like, maybe I'll just do cartwheels the whole time I'm here and make that into a performance. Instead, I did paintings that, on first glance appear to be paintings on the wall, but then unhinge and become bars or tables. And they have a ceramic studio there, so I made a series of plates that go with these plates to match, and then cake to match. And I know this is sort of like a little redundant, like, oh, that matches with that, and that matches with that, and that matches with that. But I wanted to see, residencies are a great way to just try something. And I always wanted to sort of create a space where I can serve color. And so this was it. And I actually didn't flavor the cakes, but people were like, what flavor is it? What flavor is it? And I said, well, how about I don't tell you, and you just taste it and see. And the truth is like, people know, like they're like, oh, I know that should taste yellow, that lemon, but I like thinking about playing with that. And I was there for 100 days, and everyone who's from Omaha says, I'm Omaha, and like they're kind of goofy, and so I called this kind of playfully Chromaha, and I was like, that's not really the working title, that's too silly, but it actually is stuck. Because I also did like a 100-word poem that connected to each of the colors. And so on the left top is the one layer of paint, and on the right bottom is 100 layers of paint. So it's this kind of creative thing, a lot like the stripe paintings, but just taken apart so you can actually see how the edges develop over time. And it became my meditation. Like, I didn't realize, I've always tried to meditate and not really done a very good job of it. And then when this was over, I realized this was it. This was a way of getting through a place that was a little lonely and wanting to sort of more connection, but also there wasn't a lot of color, like a diverse color. So this is like an example, the empty candy shop, yellow striped candy, graffiti. And I made also these magnets. There was a big steel wall there, and so every day I would just put up these magnets that people could take and place them, try to match it with the place that the color was, or just take it home and see what color, it would be their color for the day. Also taking advantage of the space, this is like the install room, and I just walked with paint as I mixed it and rolled it into a ball, which ended up looking, this was like 10 gallons of paint, something crazy in the end, and ended up being this little measly ball of gold. And I came back and again agreed to do a party. I was starting at CALA in Berkeley, which was a print fellowship, and everything I did from then on, I needed some kind of print involved. So I printed this, Eat This Please, and all of the shapes could be found on the snack table. So the idea was to kind of fill in the space. Like, you remember Connection 4 or whatever that game, was that what it's called? And, yeah, or like where you plop the shapes in. I was kind of thinking about that. Again, printing, this is with another collaborator who I can't say enough good things about, I'm Ye. We did a, sort of like that color bar, but there were 30 people around and 4 rounds of that a night for a New Year's show. And we called this Resolutions for a New Year. So there were 8 courses, and each one had a print element. So we go around, print, and then a small bite. And these kids were there, and they just waited. They didn't touch it. So it was about color and flavor. I have a hard time talking about this one because it's kind of really layered. But it has everything that I care about in it. And in the end, then people take it. So like one of them was, they were all named, it's more of a feeling, is like the bubble gum, and like what to wear black. Like it was all kind of these puns of like the art world. And then I recently finished in May this residency at the Workshop Residence in San Francisco, where I went in every Thursday in May and painted a series of panels that were a color pairing of some sort. So this was red and orange. It was just a way of me structuring the events. They needed to bring in some more people. A lot of the time, that's a little bit my position as an artist, is kind of engaging people. So essentially I was making these paintings all day in order to create kind of an atmosphere for this like happy hour snack service, in which I'm working with the Workshop residents on a series of dominoes as like a game, but they'll be my style. And so I wanted the snack trays to kind of allude to sort of be a precursor for that. And I watch people sort of with these placemats and taking food from these things, and I always want them to be able to have it all, in the drink and the snack. And so this was a way of doing that, and a little something I'd been thinking about that was a good opportunity to test out. And so the drink would be the one color and the snack would be the other. And again, printing, because I was still at CALA. And then, so this was the last week, yellow. And so I think this to me was one of the most successful versions of putting the food and the art together. Like, they were the same, not just because they were the same day, but just because the color was there and you were taking the color in, and I was sort of hosting it. So it was satisfying. And then we cut, essentially all of those panels really were because they wanted a wall. And I just wanted a creative way of like getting those colors. And those were installed in the entryway and then cut up, the extra pieces were cut up and sold so people could make their own little arrangements to take home. And here we are, back in Saskatoon. And I am painting a wall actually the whole wrapping of the Kenderdine, a different color every day, but this time, rather than the stripe, I'm actually, because it's also a larger space, thinking about like the shapes that you see in Saskatchewan, landing here, or even, like grain elevators, just these sort of abstract forms that you encounter in the landscape. And so you'll have to come up and see that, and these are some of the examples. And I guess something just, I feel like when I talk about some of these projects, it's, oh, and then this residency, and I have been doing a lot of those, mostly because I outgrew, I have worked in the garage of my house since grad school, and I think I really wanted to work bigger, and so I sort of sourced these points. But I also think, working at home or with a kitchen or in a kitchen for 4 years really taught me a lot about, like, in the kitchen you have like a mise en place, and you have a list, and you have everything ready, so if you need salt you just reach for it because you know where it is. That really helped me be able to travel a little bit more with the art, and also helped, I think the art practice to be flexible in these places and to be open-minded and maybe to see things differently. Got into some of the food stuff because of the art practice, like the sort of failure and experimentation and that kind of thing. And so coming back to Saskatoon in this way has been like so much different, even though it's a lot of the same actions and stuff as the Irving Street project. It's such a different experience for me because rather than just wandering around, I'm actually going to these points that I sort of remember and really wanting it to mean something to the people of Saskatoon, like that it's sort of a map of this city and also sort of in honor of it. And it's neat to see, like, okay, that Ferris wheel is not how I remembered it. It wasn't all yellow, and see how some things are the same and some things are different, and treat myself to ice cream on Monday. So I think that's it. I mean, I think I'm like really happy to talk more about the project at the Kinderdine if you ever want to come and visit. I will talk to you. I might be rolling the wall, but and then I'm also really excited. Some of the prints from Kala are in the show with Tammy at the college galleries, and I think that even though they're prints, they are the process is really overlaps a lot, and I like to see how the prints actually are quite painterly, but I'll let you make your own opinion about that. So I don't know, I kind of went a little over, but I do like to leave time for questions if anyone has any, or you can just go and be free.
Are there any questions or comments? We have a few minutes left before 1 o'clock, but I'm sure Leah will stick around a few minutes after, if you'd like to talk to her alone.
It's a very practical thing. What kind of paint, and does it have fumes?
Oh, I think about that sometimes. And then lots of times I don't think about it. I think I go to the that is so part of my day, is going to find the color, going to the hardware store, matching. I travel a lot with the paint chips and like match up the thing. And then, and also letting those people know, like, they're kind of part of it, like all of the people at Rona are invited. But I can't, I don't stay in the room all day. Maybe I do. Like, yeah. But at this point, it's not. I mean, they make paint now that really it's all like for kids' rooms and not too bad. So yeah.
Is doing the labor important to you?
Is doing the labor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think there's. For me, I think it's like the meditation a little bit works into that. I think I feel better when I'm active when I'm doing the motion. I also think I have had people sort of from time to time, for Irving Street, it was more of like a hosting scenario, and so some of my friends would bring their kids, and I'd have the chair, and I'd say, okay, you can like put a little bit of this on, and then we'd get it all over their corduroys. But it is, I think for this, for me, it was really important to do, it's, I think about like, I call myself a painter, and then here I am like house painting pretty much, like I come into the gallery with the paint on the cart, and people are like, when you're done, you can come over to my house and paint my walls. And and I was like, no, I'll be good after this. And so I'm still thinking about that, because this has been where I'm actually like doing sort of a time lapse situation up there, which I've never recorded the process ever in that way, and that's been sort of an interesting thing, because there's a real satisfaction for me seeing a color covered by another color in kind of a more expansive way. Yeah. And I think it's like it's like people have different ways, and so I think I like it to be sort of whatever. I don't even know how I do it, but for it to be consistent.
Some of the food painting events, did you find most of the people were coming because of the food, or were they coming because of art, because of the painting?
Yeah, it's
like
good.
the print and were they art people, or were they food?
I think I had to stop thinking about, because I was getting quite a few requests to do cakes for this and food. Like the word in San Francisco these days is activation, and I was like, so really what you mean is like you don't really have a budget, but you want to engage the public. And so like just I'm not a caterer, and I don't have the means to do that right now, and I don't think I really have the interest. I like to approach them both as art, so I really now I do things as an artist. So if they want a food thing, then I'm budgeting it out, and I'm sort of approaching it like an artwork. So I think it always helps when there's snacks. Sorry, I don't have anything for you today. But but I also like to think like, okay, I actually considered like, should I hide a little something under everybody's chair like Oprah, or can you just like be satiated by some of the images and my poor jokes. And then maybe you can go
Make a cake.
get a snack somewhere else.
Leah, can I ask you just how do you situate your work, and who are your precedents? Because when I look at the stripes, that recalls for me very strongly, Gary Kennedy's stripe paintings where he's following the canvas, and it's a very self-referential kind of an activity, or Eric Cameron when he's layering paints, etc. And then, but you're doing, much more of a sort of a community-oriented. I don't know if it's exactly activist work, but of course you're trying to sort of bust out of the white cube a bit here. But how do you situate yourself?
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
Because I don't want to. I think the things that, when you are asked to do something, and you're like, yeah, that's not really like what I do. But I sort of want to be open. I think, so, of course, I'm always interested in the things that have come before, and I'm always so thrilled when I've done something and then realize that actually, like, John Baldessari also painted a room, but he had a student do it. But, like, that you're thinking, like, it's the thought process of like a parallel thing from another time. I think that's neat, but I don't usually say, like, oh, Bridget, for example, I had a good conversation with my dad about those stripe paintings, and he thought, why, of all the people who do stripe paintings, why would you do that if it's already been done? And I said, I handed him a paintbrush, and he did one, and his stripes were all like not quite, he's left-handed, and they're a little wobbly, and then, and together they're two different thing next to each other. They're two different things, and so my point was made and taken, and I think he still probably has those together somewhere. But to not do something because perhaps it has been done before, like you just never know what you're going to get out of it in the process. And so, I mean, I know that's like a little off a tangent, but I
wasn't really meaning it
Yeah.
in the sense of being derivative or anything
No,
like
no.
that. I don't use that word anymore.
But I think about it because I also
Yeah.
think like Barnett Newman's work is the most, I read this somewhere, that like the most vandalized work in museums because it's like people don't get it. They can't enter it. They don't know why this is in a museum when it's just, and so I think a lot about that kind of thing. I think about like people who work with color, like Anne Truitt, who talks about color and setting it free. And like there's just these little things, like I feel like I sort of collect the way Agnes Martin, for instance, is someone who, for sure, her practice, and I'm reading this book that's kind of changing my mind now, from her studio assistant. Has anyone seen that? Yeah, anyway, I kind of can't read it. Anyway, so I always want to know how people have worked. John Baldessari, for instance, like used his limitations. Had a show, couldn't get the show there any other ways except for his car, so the show had to fit in his trunk. Those kinds of things, like, I love that. I love those limitations to make the work, and I love thinking about art like that. And I think if I think too much about who I'm in reference to, I can't do it. And so I want to have other people, anyone, write about it. And I'll talk about it for a long time, but you can put it on paper.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
He's working at the LA. That was really good.